A loudspeaker is an electroacoustic transducer which converts an electrical audio signal into a corresponding sound. The first primitive loudspeakers were invented during the development of telephone systems in the late 1800s, but electronic amplification by vacuum tube beginning around 1912 made loudspeakers truly practical. By the 1920s they were used in radios, phonographs, public address systems and theater sound systems for talking motion pictures. The most widely used type of speaker today is the dynamic speaker, invented in 1925 by Edward W. Kellogg and Chester W. Rice. The dynamic speaker operates on the same basic principle as a dynamic microphone, but in reverse, to produce sound from an electrical signal. When an alternating current electrical audio signal is applied to its voice coil, a coil of wire suspended in a circular gap between the poles of a permanent magnet, the coil is forced to move rapidly back and forth due to Faraday's law of induction, which causes a diaphragm attached to the coil to move back and forth, pushing on the air to create sound waves. Besides this most common method, there are several alternative technologies that can be used to convert an electrical signal into sound. The sound source must be amplified with an amplifier before the signal is sent to the speaker. Speakers are typically housed in an enclosure, which is often a rectangular or square box made of wood or sometimes plastic, and the enclosure plays an important role in the quality of the sound. Where high-fidelity reproduction of sound is required, multiple loudspeaker transducers are often mounted in the same enclosure, each reproducing a part of the audible frequency range. In this case, the individual speakers are referred to as drivers, and the entire unit is called a loudspeaker. Drivers made for reproducing high audio frequencies are called tweeters, those for middle frequencies are called mid-range drivers, and those for low frequencies are called woofers. Smaller loudspeakers are found in devices such as radios, televisions, portable audio players, computers, and electronic musical instruments. Larger loudspeaker systems are used for music, sound reinforcement in theaters and concerts, and in public address systems. Terminology. The term loudspeaker may refer to individual transducers or to complete speaker systems consisting of an enclosure including one or more drivers, to adequately reproduce a wide range of frequencies with even coverage. Most loudspeaker systems employ more than one driver, particularly for higher sound pressure level or maximum accuracy. Individual drivers are used to reproduce different frequency ranges. The drivers are named subwoofers, woofers, mid-range speakers, tweeters, and sometimes super tweeters, optimized for the highest audible frequencies. The terms for different speaker drivers differ, depending on the application. In two-way systems there is no mid-range driver, so the task of reproducing the mid-range sounds falls upon the woofer and tweeter. Home stereos use the designation tweeter for the high-frequency driver, while professional concert systems may designate them as HF or highs. When multiple drivers are used in a system, a filter network, called a crossover, separates the incoming signal into different frequency ranges and routes them to the appropriate driver. A loudspeaker system with n separate frequency bands is described as n-way speakers. A two-way system will have a woofer and a tweeter. A three-way system employs a woofer, a mid-range, and a tweeter. Loudspeaker driver of the type pictured are termed dynamic to distinguish them from earlier drivers. All speakers using piezoelectric or electrostatic systems, or any of several other sorts. History. Johann Philipp Reis installed an electric loudspeaker in his telephone in 1861. It was capable of reproducing clear tones, but also could reproduce muffled speech after a few revisions. Alexander Graham Bell patented his first electric loudspeaker as part of his telephone in 1876, which was followed in 1877 by an improved version from Ernst Siemens. During this time, Thomas Edison was issued a British patent for a system using compressed air as an amplifying mechanism for his early cylinder phonographs, but he ultimately settled for the familiar metal horn driven by a membrane attached to the stylus. In 1898, Horace Short patented a design for a loudspeaker driven by compressed air. He then sold the rights to Charles Parsons, who was issued several additional British patents before 1910. A few companies, including the Victor Talking Machine Company and Pathé, produced record players using compressed air loudspeakers. However, these designs were significantly limited by the poor sound quality and their inability to reproduce sound at low volume. Variants of the system were used for public address applications, and more recently, other variations have been used to test space equipment resistance to the very loud sound and vibration levels that the launching of rockets produces. The first experimental moving coil loudspeaker was invented by Oliver Lodge in 1898. The first practical moving coil loudspeakers were manufactured by Danish engineer Peter L. Jensen and Edwin Pridham in 1915 in Napa, California. Like previous loudspeakers, these used horns to amplify the sound produced by a small diaphragm. Jensen was denied patents, being unsuccessful in selling the product to telephone companies. In 1915, they changed the target market to radios and public address systems, and named the product Magnavox. Jensen was, for years after the invention of the loudspeaker, a part owner of the Magnavox company. The moving coil principle commonly used today in speakers was patented in 1924 by Chester W. Rice and Edward W. Kellogg. The key difference between previous attempts and the patent by Rice and Kellogg is the adjustment of mechanical parameters so that the fundamental resonance of the moving system is below the frequency where the cone's radiation impedance becomes uniform. About this same period, Walter H. Shockley invented the first ribbon loudspeaker together with Dr. Erwin Gerlach. These first loudspeakers used electromagnets because large, powerful permanent magnets were generally not available at a reasonable price. The coil of an electromagnet, called a field coil, was energized by current through a second pair of connections to the driver. This winding usually served a dual role, acting also as a Shure coil, filtering the power supply of the amplifier that the loudspeaker was connected to. AC ripple in the current was attenuated by the action of passing through the Shure coil. However, AC line frequencies tended to modulate the audio signal going to the voice coil and added to the audible hum. In 1930, Jensen introduced the first commercial fixed magnet loudspeaker. However, the large, heavy iron magnets of the day were impractical and field coil speakers remained predominant until the widespread availability of lightweight Alnico magnets after World War II. In the 1930s, loudspeaker manufacturers began to combine 2- and 3-band passes worth of drivers in order to increase frequency response and sound pressure level. In 1937, the first film industry standard loudspeaker system, the Shure horn system for theaters, was introduced by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. It used 4 15-inch low-frequency drivers, a crossover network set for 375 Hz, and a single multicellular horn with 2 compression drivers providing the high frequencies. John Kenneth Hilliard, James Bullough Lansing, and Douglas Shearer all played roles in creating the system. At the 1939 New York World's Fair, a very large two-way public address system was mounted on a tower at Flushing Meadows. The 827 inches low-frequency drivers were designed by Rudy Bozak in his role as chief engineer for Synaudiograph. High-frequency drivers were likely made by Western Electric. Alltech Lansing introduced the 604, which became the most famous coaxial duplex driver. In 1943, it incorporated a high-frequency horn that sent sound through the middle of a 15-inch woofer for near-point source performance. Alltech's Voice of the Theater loudspeaker system arrived in the marketplace in 1945, offering better coherence and clarity at the high output levels necessary in movie theaters. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences immediately began testing its sonic characteristics. They made it the film house industry standard. In 1955. In 1954, Edgar Vilcher developed the acoustic suspension principle of loudspeaker design in Cambridge, Massachusetts. This allowed for better bass response than previously from drivers mounted in smaller cabinets, which was important during the transition to stereo recording and reproduction. He and his partner Henry Kloss formed the Acoustic research company to manufacture and market speaker systems using this principle. Subsequently, continuous developments in enclosure design and materials led to significant audible improvements. The most notable improvements to date in modern dynamic drivers, and the loudspeakers that employ them, are improvements in cone materials, the introduction of high-temperature adhesives, improved permanent magnet materials, improved measurement techniques, computer-aided design, and finite element analysis. At low frequencies, the application of electrical network theory to the acoustic performance allowed by various enclosure designs has been very important at the design level.